This is Stories from the Hackery, a podcast about the students, alumni, and community members that continue to shape Nashville Software School. Nashville Software School is the nation's first nonprofit coding bootcamp where a person with aptitude and motivation can gain the skills needed for a career in tech. For more information, visit us at NashvilleSoftwareSchool.com. Welcome back to Stories from the Hackery, podcast series for Nashville Software School. I'm John Wark. I'm the founder and CEO of the school, and we're going to do something that we do occasionally and have somebody else from NSS, and we're going to talk a little bit about some things that we have been working on and some things we're planning to work on here at NSS. And we'd like to share those things with everybody so that they have some information about what's coming here as we are getting ready to transition. As we record this, we're a day or two away from November, which means we're not that far away from 2020 next. So I'm joined today by Steve Brownlee, who we've had on before. So Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Steve Brownlee, joined Nashville Software School back in 2015. I've been working in software since as long as I can remember. I won't bore you with the details of that. But yeah, I've always had a passion for education. Joined forces with John back then to really build out this program and teach people into this field in the correct way. And I'm really excited to talk about the topic for today because it's a brand new topic in our field that we all need to be prepared for.
Boy, isn't that the truth, Steve? So we're going to talk some today about generative AI and what we're doing at NSS around that subject. So we're going to talk a little bit about how our teaching has evolved in our programs with the advent 3 years ago, roughly, the announcement of ChatGPT, and how our thinking about using generative AI tools in our programs, both as it relates to training beginners who are trying to get into the tech career fields, as well as around continuing ed, professional development, in other words, upskilling and reskilling of existing folks. I think we're past the point where it's a question of whether this stuff's real. I think we've pretty much figured out that here in the software development world, generative AI is going to have a big impact. It's not that these tools are going to replace us, it's that we are going to become more productive and more effective at what we do through the use of those. That's our current working assumption. So maybe let's talk first, Steve, about how we've evolved, what we're teaching and how we're teaching in our basic bootcamp. So our full stack software development bootcamp, which you're our lead instructor for that, our lead curriculum developer on that. And we've gone through a real arc of thinking about this stuff. Talk to us a little bit about what that journey has looked like over the past 2.5 years or so, where we are on that journey. And then maybe we talk a little bit about kind of how we see that journey, what we think that journey is going to look like as it continues. So,
yeah. And the journey has been an exciting one because as the AI industry, large language models, and the tooling around it has evolved, it has also allowed us to evolve how to use it in the classroom. When ChatGPT first came out, of course, I started diving into it immediately. And one of the first things that I started to look at it, not only from a how can I benefit from this, but any new technology comes out and I think about how can this help people? So I started experimenting with how can you use this weird web interface with this large language model to actually help somebody who's learning something new to help them learn better, right? So I started experimenting a lot with system prompts, and that was really our first foray. Once me and the team kind of came up with a good idea of how can we coach a beginner to use this tool to not generate code for them, because A, it was really bad at that back then, and B, we didn't want them to do it anyways, but how to enhance their learning. to explain concepts to them, to make them think about things maybe from a different perspective. So that was our first foray into it. And that is still a big part of our course. So other tooling has come out. So the next thing that we started to do after, and that typically happens in the first 3 weeks of the course. Not in the first week, but usually around week 2 or 3 after they're digging into it and they get a little bit more comfortable with the tool set, we do some heavy coaching with them on, all right, let's fire up ChatGPT and let's say you don't understand how functions work in JavaScript. Here's how you can utilize this tool as your personal learning assistant to help you personally, right? Because I think that's really one of the powerful things that students have told us over time is it actually becomes a way for them to personalize how they want to learn about things. Because the instructional team has learned over the years many tactics, but sometimes all of our tactics just don't work with somebody. So this is just another thing for the learner to add into their skill set to personalize their own learning environment. So yeah, we coach them on how to do that. Just two different things. Ask how to ask questions and gain understanding. And B, the other thing that I actually learned from a student back in the early days, they started to use an LLM as like a quizzer for them, right? So they would say, hey, LLM, here, once a day, I want you to ask me a standard question about this topic and see if I can answer it correctly. And I thought that was a great idea. So I started to coach all future cohorts on that. So those are the first 2 things I learned how to use with LLMs. But then, of course, the AI industry started to really evolve. And one of the most recent things that we're doing with cohorts, and this typically happens around week 5 after they get some skill with their prompts, because that is a skill set in and of themselves, how to prompt correctly. So the new thing that we're showing people is a tool from Google called NotebookLM, which you've seen.
Oh, yeah. Love NotebookLM.
Because what they can do and what we show them how to do is to like upload their own personal notes, because it's a RAG tool, right? Retrieval Augmented Generation, for those watching who may not know what that acronym means. But it's a tool that allows you to upload your own notes and your own learning materials to this tool. And then what that does is it gives the students a more contextual way to have a conversation. Instead of just these kind of one-shot Q&A sessions that you would typically have with like ChatGPT via the web interface, they can keep adding more and more of their personal knowledge base and then ask questions, and it can pull from all of that knowledge that the student uploaded about what they do know, what they don't know, maybe articles that they found on the web that they want to upload to this. So it becomes a much even more personalized learning environment that can have broader, more nuanced conversations than you can typically have through the web interface with ChatGPT.
And that's one of the, sorry, Steve, but that's one of the great things about NotebookLM, building up almost your own private knowledge base that you can continue to add to, but you can also interact with. And then some of the other tools in NotebookLM, like the ability to represent it as a mind map, the ability to have it create a podcast. They actually have
they love the podcast feature. Yeah.
Oh man, it's awesome. It's cool that the students are picking up how to use these things, not just using, again, the foundation models as learning aids, but how to build their own learning resource, right, is awesome. So sorry, you got me excited about NotebookLM, so I kind of jumped.
It's a great topic, and hopefully this inspires other people to go look at it, because it really is an amazing tool just for learning something. So, but we've only done this for 2 cohorts because NotebookLM is a relatively new tool, but both of them, it's like, this is amazing. I really feel like I've got somebody who is my personal learning tutor. Like, they love it. But we still make sure that they don't use any of the tools to generate code yet. And most students follow our guidance. And even for the ones who maybe go outside the realms of our guidance, they learn very quickly the dangers of that, right? I've even had students self-report like, I tried to make it generate code, but it was all garbage I didn't understand. I'm like, well, now you know. So, but we very quickly get into maybe a few weeks later, maybe around week 7 or 8 of the course, we show them how to generate let's call it tedious code. Like, for example, around that point in the class, they're building very simple JSON database files because they're starting to learn that full stack development, right? So we've got this tool that fakes being an API, but it needs a database, and it's just a simple JSON file. Well, before the era of LLMs, what we would have to do as developers is to go and manually generate dozens or hundreds of JSON objects in that database just to get some sample data to work with. So we show them how to use a lot of these tools to do things like that, right? Go and generate 100 records in this JSON file of just random data about people or toys or whatever the data they want to work with, right? So it's a huge time saver for them because, of course, LLMs can be huge time savers to generate tedious data. So that's kind of like their first foray where we guide them how to have this thing actually generate something. It's not code yet, but it is supporting code, right? Whether it's JSON data or JavaScript, simple JavaScript arrays with numeric values. So we do get them into code generation, kind of half of our program. So then we came up with an idea in the second half of the program. How can we continue their knowledge, especially this probably happened in the past 8 months or so, where we realized that AI and LLMs are really becoming a critical part of the job, right? How can we continue their education so that when they get that job, they can utilize these tools to help them not only learn, but be more proficient? So one of the instructors, Dave Burzak, he came up with this idea, which so far has only been run with 3 cohorts, but has worked really well. When they do a group project together in the second half of the course, once they're done with the group project, we actually go in with them and we have the students generate prompts. So we help them build up their context engineering skills. So now that you've got this product that you've already built, let's see if the students can generate good prompts that will build what they just built for them. And that has been a really enlightening moment for a lot of our students, that the capabilities of this, as long as I put in good prompts, because in the first half of the program, especially for the students who get burned, they realize they don't know how to prompt this thing. They sometimes just treat it as if it's a Google search, right? So of course, garbage in, garbage out. So that's where we start actually showing them, if you provide all of this context in your prompt, and even in follow-up conversation, you can actually have this thing produce fairly high quality code that is near to what you would produce, as long as you put in enough context.
And I love...
yeah, that's a fun process.
Sorry. Yeah, that sounds to me like a really fun project. And it's an interesting way to think about starting to get them comfortable with generating code, the ins and outs, the do's and don'ts, the trusted or nots, or the trust but verifies of starting to generate code. So yeah, you build something first, because that's still foundational, right? I mean, that's something we've believed all through this. And it's why we didn't want students using these tools to generate code at the very beginning, because it's like, no, you still got to know how to write code, right? And maybe our view of that is shifting. I'm going to ask you about that in a minute, to where, well, yes, maybe you're not going to be the one writing all the code in the future, but you're still going to have to know what good code looks like, because you're going to be reading code, because you're going to be validating what comes out of the LLM, right? So the only way to learn how to be a good reviewer of code or a good editor of code is to learn how to write it, right? So that foundational, I still got to understand add, subtract, multiply, divide if I'm going to use a calculator effectively. And that's maybe an overly simplistic analogy relative to doing software development. But I think our frame of reference on this still is, if you're going to be working as a professional software developer with AI assistance, you're going to be reading all their code. So you still have to know how to write it to get to that point, right? Is that sort of a fair...
Right. The way we see it, it's almost like reverse engineering, because we've learned over the years that the group project is where almost all of the real learning happens. So get the pattern down in your brain. Start to build up those mental schemas first by writing the code yourself. Because if you go into it and you don't understand what those schemas are, because again, these are beginners. So build up the schemas first, and that actually allows you to build better prompts. So we call them reverse engineering workshops, right? Utilize the patterns that you just implemented and the questions that you had and the failures and the successes, and use that to have this tool build what you just built, because the context is fresh in their mind, right? They just finished building
Right.
it the day before. So now it's a great opportunity to write out that big, long contextual prompt and see if you can get it to build exactly what you just did the way you did it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That strikes me as just a really clear way for them to start making the learning step they need to make, but doing it in the context of something they've already written, they've already built, they've already gone through the thought process,
Yep.
right? I love that. One thing to mention for listeners who, or even viewers who aren't familiar with our programs, we've made a number of references to 4 weeks or 7 weeks or the second half of the program. In the context of what Steve's talking about, this is all the 6-month full-time version of our full stack software development program. So when Steve says in the second half of the program, he's talking mainly about the half of the program where the students learn to build server side of a full stack web app. And so each half is about 12 weeks. The full program is about 24 weeks. So it's 25 weeks, 12 break week, 12. So just relative to any of the references we make to duration of things or where in a course it is. So, but I think that's important because unlike a lot of coding boot camps where the programs are not 6-month full-time long, our students do get a much longer, deeper, richer experience than the 12, 13, 14 weeks. That's a lot more common, I think.
Yeah, and that's a big benefit of the 6-month program, because I can't imagine trying to, in a cohesive way, to get somebody in a 3-month program how to learn to use an LLM responsibly and efficiently in such a short amount of time. So that really does benefit us, that we can space that out and allow their skills to grow gradually. So
Yeah. And gradually, of course, being a relative term, because as our students will say,
true.
as our students will say,
6 months, yeah.
yeah, 6 months goes by pretty darn fast. So,
Yeah.
but I agree with you, right? Trying to think about how you would layer all of this on top of what was already there in a 12 to 14 week program. It's like, oh my goodness. Wow. All
Yeah, it
right.
is.
So,
Right. Well, but the
all
final,
right.
so the final stage where we actually coach them. So this is around week 20, right? They do one big final huge group project in all of our boot camps, where they collaboratively build a fairly complex full stack application. So we have in the backlog of that, there are 3 tickets that we've specifically written where there is an existing set of code, right? 3 different features that have some basic functionality already there, where they are tasked specifically. Your job is to use your LLM of choice to write a good contextual prompt to complete building out these 3 features, right? So we specifically task them to generate code for these very specific parts of the application, and only those parts, because we still tell them, right, you don't do this for everything, it's just for these. And we want to see what their prompts are, right? And go in and coach them and give them ideas about how they could have made it better. So that's the whole phase of the program, from just use it to learn, one-off conversations, all the way to the end where use it as part of your actual development process to make yourself more productive and efficient.
Well, and I like the tickets on that big project are around something that somebody else has already started the development of,
Yep.
because our junior developers, when they go to work, while some may fall into a greenfield environment in a startup or an early stage company, I mean, we know that certainly happens with our students, but so many of them go into an existing code base, right? They go to a shop where there's already an existing code base. In some cases, it might be huge, right? So having at least some exposure to not every project you do is going to be an empty file in your editor, right? There's going to be existing stuff. And how I do context engineering on that and things is different than if I'm starting my own thing from scratch.
Oh.
So helping them understand that, I think, is important. And we're certainly building some continuing education workshops now for both our students and working professionals that start with an existing app rather than a greenfield environment as well.
Right.
So maybe we can loop around on that. But so anything else in terms of the evolution of sort of how we teach the boot camp and the skill in this, and also then therefore the skills that the students come out with at the end of the boot camp, or have we sort of covered all of that?
Yeah, that really is the evolution. And this happened over the last almost 3 years now as just the tooling became available. So our ability to make them more productive at a junior level with LLMs has kind of kept pace with the industry itself as they have produced more tools in more sophisticated models and everything. So, and I think that'll
Right.
continue in the future. If more effective learning tooling comes out, we'll find a way to integrate it and give them that skill that employers are looking for now, right? Because that skill set has changed. And as employer expectations change, right, we got to make sure we keep pace with that.
Well, yeah, and given that the pace of evolution of all of this, I mean, it gets commented on all the time in blogs and on Twitter. Am I the only one that still calls it Twitter? Anyways, how the pace of change is so much faster than we've seen in prior waves of disruptive change, like when the internet came out, right? I mean, that took us many years to digest.
Yeah.
This seems to be happening at such an amazingly fast pace. And yeah, I can't believe that we're done, Steve, right? It's going to keep happening. And
yeah, that hype cycle, which every tech goes through, watching it in the evolution of LLMs, where the hype cycles last weeks, where typically it's a month-long or year-long process for a hype cycle to complete. Now they're happening within the span of less than a month. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah. Within the same day, I could be at the peak of over expectations and then the trough of disillusionment, right? Yep. Sometimes it doesn't take long. So, but knowing that, and it's funny, one of the AI research folks whose newsletter I follow is interesting. About 2 months ago, was talking in one of the issues of the newsletter that possibly the core skill right now is not understand any of the existing tools or whatever. It's learning how to learn. That people know how to learn because this stuff has changed so fast. And that just kind of cracked me up because, as you know, but maybe people listening to us don't, on the first day of every one of our classes, we have a session called Learning to Learn, and really trying to set the expectation of our students that this learning journey they're starting by coming to a boot camp, whether it's 4 months full time, 6 months full time, 12 months part, whatever it is. If you're moving into the tech field, this is the beginning of a lifelong learning, continuous learning. And hopefully you will enjoy that because you're going to have to do it whether you want to or not. But the idea that this AI evolution is forcing broader based sort of acknowledgement of that, I thought was pretty humorous.
Well, that and the tool in and of itself that can accelerate that process.
Well, that's right. This is maybe unique in the history of the technology evolutions we've had in software development, where the disruptive technology itself will help us accelerate our learning and effectiveness in adopting the new technology. So it's certainly had a big impact on our students' ability to learn, particularly for those students who sort of embrace it as a learning assistant.
Right. Yep.
Right. So we've also been working on some other things though around generative AI. One of the classes that you spearheaded the development of, I mean, we're teaching it now as a continuing ed class for people who've graduated, but it's Agentic AI for developers, because another one of the things that's relatively new in terms of the tooling is our coding agents, right? Not just like the autocomplete tools like GitHub Copilot originally was, or not just using sort of a general purpose LLM like Gemini or Claude or whatever and asking it to generate code, but now agents, in other words, tools that will loop and problem solve, iterate multiple times, right, without us constantly directing it. And probably the first real use case, I think, for effective agents, although people are experimenting with agents in almost every problem domain, but the one that I'm aware of where it's having the biggest impact right now is in software development.
Yep.
Right. And I'd say software development in the broadest sense, because it's the generation of code to solve some problem, which could be in the hands of a data analyst. It could be in the hands of a data engineer. It could be in the hands of a DevOps engineer. Right. Yep. But it's building software. And that's, I think you started experimenting with those in doing some development of various things, but certainly some internal systems that we use. Yep. And learning those. And I can remember us having some conversations about there's a learning curve to use these things effectively.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And we've seen that as an industry as well. Some of the studies from MIT and Stanford and people like that, even with senior people, they actually reduce productivity initially because you got to learn how to use them effectively. Now, some of that is also because the time we get back from having the tool write code gets taken away because we have to review the code and validate the code and stuff. So the productivity game for using these tools isn't all, it saves me stuff. No, it saves stuff here. The tool giveth, the tool taketh away.
Right.
So, but anyways, figuring out that learning curve, figuring out, okay, how does this change my whole process of development? And so we've built a class. You've built a class with some help from some of the folks on your team that we rolled out. Was it 2 months ago now?
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, and we're getting ready to teach it again starting, I think it's next week, right?
It's on Monday.
Yeah. So Agentic AI for developers, which is all about taking somebody who is a developer. They already know how to develop. They probably used generative AI and LLM in some form to generate some code even. Yeah. But how do we get them up to speed using these agentic tools? And we've launched that as part of our ProTech program, which is the program where, thanks, at least partially to a grant from the state of Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, we're able to offer free continuing ed classes to folks in tech who are either looking for their first job. So they might be a graduate of a bootcamp like NSS. They might have gotten their computer science degree here in the last year at MTSU, but they're on their search for their first job, or they were in tech and they got caught in all these tech layoffs the last 2 or 3 years, right? So how do we help people catch up, adapt more skills? We know those computer science grads didn't learn anything about using agentic tools to build software. And just based on the discussion that you gave over what we've learned and added to the bootcamp over the last 2 or 3 years, we know that anybody that graduated from the bootcamp even 6 months ago probably didn't get any exposure to that. So talk to me a little bit about the agentic class and kind of what the learning objectives of that class are and why this is important for developers.
Yeah, because during the boot camp, we want them to be focused on using the LLM to enhance their learning with a little bit of code generation by the end to help them build up that skill set. But just like you'd never give a 13-year-old a dinosaur, no matter how much you train them on how to appropriately use the dinosaur, you know that disaster would entail. So we don't actually show them at all, talk about the existence of agentic AI during the bootcamp at all. So this workshop is to actually help them get a more professional kind of exposure to that tool set, in that instead of just, even with NotebookLM, where they're having contextual conversations, it's not really being used as what I call it as an intern, which is really what the Agentic AI workshop teaches them how to use this thing to accelerate not only their learning, but their productivity. So we show them how to, just going back, I remember sitting with you the first time I tried that Windsurf product. And when it built back the Reimagined Foundations course and how I was blown away by that. So this Agentic AI course is, how can I interface with an LLM directly in the coding editor of my choice and have it learn the patterns that I want to use in this project, learn the architecture of the entire project, keep track of what my current work is, right, in that context. What is a log of all of the work I've done in the past? Keep that context, that long-term context, not just a single conversation context, but all of the work that I've done in this project from the beginning, and help me over time actually have a natural language conversation with the LLM as I'm building this. And as you start to build that up, you can actually talk to it as if you're talking to a human intern in some cases. If you've built 4 features that are relatively the same using the same architecture, 4 weeks from now or 2 months from now, you can say, I need to build another endpoint for my products that allows people to delete it. And just literally say that in English. And now that the LLM agent that you've integrated with your development environment knows exactly how you name your endpoints, it knows exactly how you like to interface with the database, it knows exactly how you name your variables, it'll say, oh, that sounds great, let me add that now. And it'll just write all of the code, and it'll look nearly identical to how you would have written it completely. So this workshop allows developers to see the power of that. Not only how to use the tool itself, but how that long-term context engineering at the beginning, right? Because I really have them focus on the context engineering, how to review and debug the code that is generated at the beginning, which is right, you just said it, right? You got to learn how to use that at the beginning and make sure that it's producing the content that you want, and have those refinement. Well, that isn't what I wanted you to do. I wanted you to do this instead. But over time, those conversations become shorter and shorter and shorter as you train the tool on what you want it to do. So a big part of it at the beginning is how to provide really good context, how to review the code that is generated by it, how to debug that code when you see it's not doing what you're doing. So that's the beginning of the workshop. Then they learn how to utilize kind of that long-term context buildup, right? We use things like memory banks and context databases, and they learn how to really become effective by the end of the workshop.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've talked to a couple of the grads of the first cohort who just were kind of blown away by how much they'd learned. Yeah. And I've had one conversation with the manager of that individual who has said that person came back to their team and dramatically accelerated the progress that their team was making in adopting coding agents in at least in a greenfield environment. This is a startup that's trying to launch their first release of their product, but they said this pretty junior person who graduated recently from NSS was able to come in after going to the Agentic AI class and really move them move all their experienced guys ahead fast with knowledge about how they could more effectively use the tools to get the first release of their product built, which I thought was, I don't know if there's a better endorsement than that, right? And now going into a brownfield environment where you're coming into a huge existing code base, that may be harder to have a dramatic impact as fast on something like that. But
it's definitely a different strategy. Yes.
Yeah. So, and we've been talking about that, right? How do I go into a brownfield environment and have an impact? And I know we're working on another continuing ed class that we're planning to teach the first time it's in January, isn't it?
That's right. January.
So the class to be named later, since we're still trying to figure out how to get the 8 things that this class addresses into one title. But we used to call it, or at least I used to call it, the testing and debugging in an existing code base class. But it's definitely more than, it's definitely more than that, right? But it's one of the things we're doing there is all right, you just got dropped in the middle of a code base that you've never seen before. Welcome to your career in software development.
Yeah.
Now, what do I do, right? And how do I adapt in that environment? Now, and I assume that we're teaching some, again, the use of these tools as assistants in that context as well.
That's right, because it can accelerate your learning of something that already exists as well, but it just requires a different strategy. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things they'll get in that class is what is that strategy,
right?
As well as strategies for doing testing and debugging and things like that in a complex environment.
How to understand a system that is larger than what they've seen up to this point, right? That first introduction to systems thinking as well.
Yeah, which one of the things that I think I'm certainly starting to feel like I'm seeing in some of the industry stuff that I follow is relative to juniors, right? Is that one of the areas that everybody's going to be wanting their juniors to get up to speed on a lot faster than they historically have had to get up to speed on is the broader system thinking and architectural thinking, right? Because it's when you get up to the ability to think at that level and problem solve at that level that you can really take the greatest advantage of our new generative AI assistants. And also use them where they're effective, but also use your human skills where human skills are still mandatory, right? Like on the front end of understanding the problem, right? What is this problem, right? And then mapping that to an appropriate architecture. And that our coding interns, our AI assistants aren't going to help us a ton with that these days. Maybe they will someday. I don't know, but probably not today.
That's a good point, because that's one of the first things in the very first class within the first 15 minutes is I try to make sure everybody understands what the objective of this is and what LLMs actually are. Because I've learned that even students coming out of the bootcamp, even though we talked to them for 6 months, they still have the wrong idea, because the acronym AI is used in all of the marketing. And I'd really try to break them down from the beginning. This is not AI. This is a large language model that is a prediction engine. And I really try to drive that point home during the whole course. So,
yeah. And it's constrained by its training base. All of the things, right? And you can't trust it because it's a sneaky little bugger. Yeah. Don't turn your back on it. It'll refactor something you didn't want refactored.
That's right.
So
if you don't do it, it'll just assume what to do. And that's a bad thing.
Just like a human developer.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Oh yeah. What did my intern do when I had meetings all afternoon? Oh my God.
Yep.
Right. It's the sorcerer's apprentice problem, right? In a way.
Exactly what it is.
So yeah. Okay. So just relative to, I've been alluding to this continuing ed stuff several times. So let me just make this clear right now. Again, everything we've talked about here, like the Agentic AI class, this testing and debugging in a complex systems environment, these are all things that we're offering for free to qualified students, and they'll continue to be offered for free at least through October of next year when this first grant runs out. We're going to try to find some grant funds that allow us to extend the free period. But we're also planning in 2026 to start opening some of these things up to the community more broadly, because we know that we're all going to be using these tools as assistants. And they may be the current tools, but we've seen enough over the last few months to know that whatever the best coding agent is this week probably won't be the best coding agent next week, and all of that stuff. I mean, there's going to be a lot of change, a lot of evolution. But again, a lot of these patterns for use, a lot of these patterns of how to modify your workflow and all of those things, those are starting, I think, to settle out a little bit.
Yeah.
And one thing we hear a lot from the employers we work with and from the community, working professionals, is I want to upskill all my team, or I need to upskill myself so that I can retain my value as a professional.
So keeping an eye on what employers want, right? Our job here at NSS that we've always had on the instructional side is we never want to chase fads. But
Right.
when technologies do emerge, like we got to look at what are the fundamentals behind all these new technologies, right? Because we're working with beginners, so we can't just show them any random technology just because it's popular. Let's say even there's 5 new technologies. We have to break it down as what's underpinning all 5 of those. And we got to teach them those skills. So yes, while we keep up with employers and we keep up with technology trends, it's not just chasing the latest and greatest thing.
No, there've been that's a great point, Steve. There've been lots of new technologies in the last 12, 13 years since we started NSS. Some of which turned out were fads, some of which had effects, but they ended up being more niche areas. And there's also the judgment I know we've made a few times of nobody cares if a junior knows this, right? They're going to learn. It's the seniors are going to make all the architectural decisions on how to integrate blockchain, let's say. That was one where everybody for 6 months was, when are you going to teach blockchain? And it's like, we're not.
Right.
So because nobody's going to ask their juniors to work on that stuff, right?
Right.
The generative AI is fundamentally different, right? It's affecting everybody doing tech, because there's partly because there's so many different ways to utilize it, either as a learning tool or as a debugging assistant or as somebody to help us write code faster. And the final way that we haven't talked about, the Agentic AI that we talked about, that's really about how we as working professionals adopt our coding assistant, our generative AI buddy, right? And take advantage of that to build things. The next step is, what are we building, right? And how is that being changed by AI in general, but generative AI in particular? Because we can build generative AI capabilities into our enterprise applications, right? And so, and that could range from, just a fairly simple integration of a chatbot into like a customer service situation, right? And we're seeing lots of apps like that, which is basically calling an API so we could talk to the chatbot via an API. But increasingly, where the industry attention seems to be shifting is to building, just like we talked about coding agents for us to use. People are talking about agentic applications, right? And to where the human user is not doing all of the work, that just like we now use our agentic coding tool to generate all that boilerplate stuff you were talking about, so that the the human developer could think more about architecture and what's the problem I'm solving, and those things. And in all kinds of business applications, doing the same thing, right? Not making somebody enter the data manually in a form, but automating that, automating workflows, automating processes. And we're talking about agents. I mean, the joke kind of is that the vendors of these tools, somebody declared that 2025 was the year of the agent. And then I know Andre Karpathy, just here in the last month or so, said, who's one of the, the real serious heavyweight AI folks that walked away from OpenAI and set up his own deal, but said the next 10 years are probably the decade of agents, because it's going to take that long to get all the stuff figured out on how to do these things. But really, we're talking about some fundamental changes at the application layer, right? On what we build, frameworks for building it, and we're just starting to scratch the surface, but people are wanting to start to do that. So there's this, the term AI engineering is starting to be used for really a fairly broad area, right? Of which, I mean, it kind of covers everything from, machine learning for fine tuning and things like that, to embedding a chatbot in an application, to building agentic applications. But it's all kind of work at the application layer. And let's face it, that's kind of where we work as a coding bootcamp, is preparing software developers to build applications, right? We've been the next step, I think, in sort of the continuing ed for past or existing working professionals, which could be our grads or not, but also down the road that people are going to need to be learning as they're coming into the field is this, again, the label we've got right now, I think, is AI engineering. And my guess is that's going to specialize into multiple layers over the next couple of years. I don't know how you feel about that, but we've been talking about that a little bit. So, I think people can expect to see more from us, and I'm not going to try to dive any deeper into it myself, because there's no sense exposing my ignorance any more than I already have. But I don't know, you have any thoughts on that AI engineering subject, sort of beyond what I've said?
Well, no, not really. It's such a new field right now, and with the current limitations of the language models right now, it's very limited in what you can do with these systems. We just don't have large enough context windows. They can't retain their working memory for that long. So this is, I don't know who named this the year of the agents, but I mean, it's certainly the first year of the agents, because I agree with a multi-year, that the technology needs to evolve, the capabilities and the storage systems need to evolve before we get anywhere near like a really intelligent agentic ecosystem.
Yeah, and I agree. I so much agree with that. I mean, we're starting to see some early value. Things like the MCP protocol, right? Is a building block for doing things in agents. Yep. It's just an example. Yep. And there have been now multiple frameworks that people put out to help you build agents, to basically help layer on some of the capabilities that the LLMs right now aren't good at. So, but still a long way to go. This reminds me of internet applications circa 1998, 2001, 2004. We were learning how to build real applications on the internet, but basically almost all of the frameworks and patterns and stuff got junked when we started doing Web 2.0, right? And they were really the tools we learned on, so we knew how to build the stuff that we really needed. I think we're going to go through the same thing with agents. Yeah, probably. These patterns repeat themselves. We went through the same.
Well, at the very least, it's going to take the next 2 to 3 years for enough people to be educated on what it actually means in the first place, because there's still very few people who have any concept of what's actually going on in this field.
Yeah. There's limited understanding what the use cases are. There's limited understanding of, or just the experience of having built one or two, right? So there's still a ways to go, but we do know that people are wanting to get trained, to get knowledge on what we do know about this. So we are looking at that. That shoe probably drops later than the other stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right, Steve. So it feels like we've come a long way in 2 or 3 years in terms of our understanding, right?
Yes.
Sort of from, don't you dare touch that tool, which some mild variation of that is what I've said in several cohorts back in early 2023.
Right.
Don't you dare generate code with that. That's going to hurt you. Don't touch that hot stove. So, I mean, we've come a long way, and a lot of that by diving in and getting our own experience, and then also picking the brains of the people in the community who have been doing things, right?
Right.
Because there certainly are people in town that we know that have done a lot with this already,
Okay.
right? So it's how do we find those early adopters, early majority leading edge people who are doing real things, and learn from them. All right. Last words from you, Steve, on Agentic AI, LLMs, generative AI, other things we're working on and learned.
And you alluded to it earlier, my final thoughts. So this is just a really exciting time for the field of software in general. I think we've barely scratched the surface of what large language models and the tooling that is being built around it will actually enable us to do and how quickly we will be able to do it. Even I don't know. And I've been just heads down on this for 2 years now. And I realize I barely know anything myself. And I know more than anybody that I know. So I'm excited for the future. I'm excited about how this will actually change the value that software developers can bring to organizations, and how eventually how the end customers are going to benefit from that. It's going to be an exciting time.
I think that's right, Steve. You know, I've said a couple of times, I wish I was 20 years younger. Because this wave of things is just exciting, right? And we'll have the ability to solve so many of the kinds of problems we've solved in the past so much more effectively, and tackle whole new categories of problems that we've not been able to tackle in the past, right? And that's what our history has been for the 50 plus years I've been doing this. Each of these new waves, we learned how to solve a whole new layer of problems we never could touch before, right? And at the end of the day, those of us who basically lived at the application layer most of our career, that's what it's about, solving those problems that people have, right?
Right.
And so to be able to do that either better or to tackle whole new problems that we haven't even been able to help people with, that's really exciting. And I think there's a lot of that, right? People talk about being concerned that this stuff's going to put us all out of work. I've not seen that yet, right? And I don't know, maybe the growth in the number of software developers will slow, but it's been one of the fastest growing career fields steadily for 30 years. So even if the growth rate slowed a little bit, we're still talking about adding people because there's still lots of problems to solve. So
yeah, if it slows, it'll be rarely, because then people start to realize the capabilities that these new tools give them, which will open up more opportunities, create new businesses, and then I think we'll accelerate again.
I think we will too. I really do. And but we got some learning curves to fight. So, and that's all right.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to another episode of Stories from the Hackery. Some of the things that Steve and I have mentioned over the course of the podcast will get listed, and there'll be links to them in the show notes below. So we'll see you next time.